All right, so this is the inchworm going from bottom to top and then top to bottom. Alright guys, so that was the inchworm exercise going both up and down, and today I'm going to show you guys how to do the inchworm properly. It's a pretty powerful exercise to do. It really uses all of the components of the spine, the movement functions of the spine, so rotation, flexion, extension, side bending. It works all of those movements. So you're using all planes of the spine, all the way from head to sacrum, to move and pump your spine. So it's quite an effective exercise for a myriad of different reasons, and to be able to do it well is a pretty important thing to do, especially if you're trying to add this to your exercise regimen, because it's a pretty powerful exercise to do for a lot of different reasons. So I'll show you guys how to move up and regress that down so you can start from zero and work your way up into doing it properly. And then I'll show you guys how to move from the top down and chunk that down so you can go from zero to moving it properly. So a little bit about the inchworm itself. It's an exercise from a series of exercises called infant development exercises, which essentially are reflections of what infants do as they are in the womb, and then are moved from being in the womb to being born to being able to walk. It's a lot of the movements that infants actually do to develop spinal coordination and intermuscular coordination in their body, and also it switches on parts of the nervous system that allows you to coordinate those movements properly. And actually they reflect, the infant development series as a whole reflects the evolution of mankind and the evolution of species on Earth. So you'll see that our spines and our bodies move quite like reptiles, like fish and jellyfish, and even single-cell organisms that breathe and can expand and contract. We move like reptiles, we move like salamanders, and we move like mammals. So we are able to move in all the same ways that other species are able to move, and these infant development exercises are part of a series that allows someone to effectively rehabilitate and move in the same ways that our bodies are able to move. And these infant development exercises also carry over into more of your primary movements, your compound movements, like your bend, your push, your pull, your lunge, your squat, your gait, and your twist, which all make up pretty much every exercise that you can think of. So if I'm going to throw a baseball, for example, that is actually a lunge, a twist, and a push. So it's a combination of those primal pattern exercises, or your primary exercises, or your compound movement patterns, your primary ones. So these infant development exercises will carry over into your ability to do those movements properly. And one of the most foundational exercises is the inchworm. So the inchworm is really, it's a spinal movement only. You're not really using any of your limbs. So you're working on your ability to move across the surface using only your spine and the motion, pumping, rhythm, and flexion and extension of your spine. So essentially being able to do this properly is going to carry over into a lot of your movements, because we're actually working on literally strengthening and working all of the vertebrae of the spine together. So how to chunk that down is pretty simple. They're pretty easy movements. And once you get them, usually what happens with people is their nervous systems turn on and it kind of clicks for them and they're able to do it. And then it's just about fine tuning and getting stronger in certain areas and working and improving on it. So how to do this going both up and down is what we'll cover, and I'll show you guys how to do that right now. Okay, so I'll start on showing you how to move going up, and there's several ways to do that, and then we'll switch to moving from top to bottom. So to do this moving up, the basis of the exercise is looks complex, but it's really not. There's really three major things that are happening here. There's going to be a slight rotation movement with our spines, a extension / pull movement with our head, and a pull movement with this opposite hip. So it's going to be somewhat like this. I'm going to rotate, extend my head, and then pull with this opposite hip towards my shoulder. And then I'll rotate and repeat the same thing. And what we'll see is over time you incrementally get movement inch by inch going up towards the top of the mat. So how to chunk that down is quite simple. First we'll work on the rotation, and the rotation is going to be an exercise called cherry picking. So imagine there's a cherry tree above you, and there's a cherry over here, and there's a cherry over here, but it's pretty far out of your reach and you're just trying to get to it. Essentially what we're doing is we're just going to rhythmically reach for the cherries, and we're really going to work on getting this torso rotation in, because later we're not going to be using our arms as we master this exercise. It's going to be purely a movement in the torso. So as I get good at this, we'll move on to the next progression, which is essentially the same thing, but now we're going to be adding the pulling movement with the head and then the pulling movement with the hip. So what that will look like is we're going to want to start with a somewhat of a flat cervical spine here. So I'm not saying you have to press all the way down into the ground, but really what you want to do is you want to, if your head is stuck in extension, you're not really going to have a lot of range of motion to pull with your head. So what we're going to do is we're going to just gently tuck our chins here to allow us a little bit more space to pull with our heads. And to practice this rhythmically, essentially what we're going to be doing before we add the hip movement in is we're going to be doing our cherry picking with our chin tucked, and as we rotate towards that same side, we're then going to work on pulling with our head. And then as we come down and rotate to the other side, we're going to go back into that slight chin tuck and then reach and then pull with our head. So rhythmically what that's going to look like is this. So I'm reaching and pulling, tucking, reaching, pulling, tucking, reaching, pulling. Now, once you get rhythmical with that exercise, then you can practice it a little bit with the hips up. So I'm tucking, reaching, pulling, tucking, reaching, pulling, tucking, reaching, pulling. And then from there, we're going to add the hip pull. So it's fairly simple. If I just chunk this movement down as I'm rotating, all we're going to do is just, this hip is going to be slightly off the ground. All we're going to do is just pick it up and move it closer to our shoulder. So you can see it's almost like a jiu-jitsu move where you're going to be swinging your leg up for an arm bar or something like that. You're basically moving it from here to here. Boop, boop, boop. Fairly simple. Now how that looks when you combine it is I'm going to have my chin slightly tucked, rotate, reach, and pull. And then as I pull with my head, I'm then going to move my hip up. So how that looks dynamically is this. My chin tucked, reach, pull, shift. Reach, pull, shift. Reach, pull, shift. So a little bit quicker. Now you see I'm starting to move up just a touch inch by inch, which is why it's called the inchworm. So those movements incrementally, when you combine them together, will be able to allow you to move up the mat. And essentially what you're doing is you're essentially pumping your spine much like an inchworm does, and you're using this rhythmical movement. So as you get better at it, we're actually going to take the arms out of it. So it's going to be less, you can start with doing the inchworm while you're reaching like I just showed you, but as you get better at it, you want to rely less on the arms to reach than you do with the torso in rotation. So to advance it, to make it a full-on inchworm, is now instead of just reaching with the arm, we're actually just going to look to rotate the torso slightly. So we're basically just going to lift the shoulder off, extend the head and lift. Extend the head and lift. That way you're not using the momentum, you don't use the momentum of your shoulders to do most of the movement. You're using mostly your spine and the rotation of your spine to move yourself. So that's the inchworm going from bottom to top. And if you run into any trouble, just work on chunking it down until it starts to click. And usually what will happen is as you get the movements together, a light bulb turns on for most people, and they start to feel how it's supposed to feel. And it just gets easier from there, and just keep practicing it. All right, so next I'll show you guys how to go from top to bottom. Sometimes people find it a lot more difficult to go one way or the other, so you might find it more challenging to go from bottom to top versus top to bottom. But top to bottom is going to look something like this. So all we're doing with this movement is it's the same thing as going from bottom to top. In terms of the setup, we're going to be in the same position, arms crossed, and the entirety of the movement is literally a push with our head. So we're pushing our head, and we're actually pulling with our sacrum and pelvis and our lumbar spine. We're using these together to pull. Now to chunk this down, again, it's fairly simple. Essentially what we're doing here is we are going from extension in our cervical spine rather, and we're pushing it into a more flat state, more of a neutral flat state. So we're going from a lot of extension, and we're pushing and tucking our chin into a flatter spine. And what we're doing with our lumbar spine is we're going from a flat lumbar spine that's pressed against the floor, and we're pulling with our hips and our lumbar spine, so this is now an extension. So essentially the whole movement is an exchange of curves from our cervical spine to our lower spine that creates a wave-like motion that allows us to move along the floor. So what this will look like when you chunk it down is we're going to start, and all we're going to do is just work on flexion and extension of our cervical spine, and then we'll work on flexion and extension of our lumbar spine, and then we'll do what's called exchanging curves, and then you'll be able to move into a regular inchworm. So the first chunk is just our cervical spine, so we're just going to be here, and you can even start with your legs down. You don't have to have them up. This would be more challenging. But from here, we're just going to work on going from extension, and we're just going to tuck our chin here. Extension, tuck, extension, flexion, extension, flexion. And we're really going to work on rotating our head. So if I have like a pencil through my ears or an axis through my ears, I'm going to work on pushing and rotating my head down. So we're mainly just going for this movement here. Now the next chunk is we're going to keep everything else relaxed, and we're just going to work on pulling. Like imagine I have a towel underneath my hips, and I'm trying to pull it back towards my head. So we're going to start flat, and we're just going to pull. Push to go flat again, and then pull. Push to go flat again, and then pull. Pull. Push. Pull. So all we're doing is we're going from a flat lumbar spine to a curved lumbar spine using our pelvis to push and pull. So once you have that down rhythmically, and once you're able to do those things rhythmically, we'll move into what's called exchanging the curves. Now there is one key point I want to bring up. Whenever you're doing this exercise, what we want to avoid is allowing our hips to open up. So the angle of our femur, we don't want to allow it to come way out here or way out here. We mainly want to keep the hip joint out of the equation. It's mostly going to be our pelvis, our sacrum, and our spine, and our head. So while you're doing this, if you notice you're having to really kick your legs, we want to avoid the momentum, again, using the momentum of our shoulders as we go up, and then the momentum of our legs as we go down to carry us. It's mostly just a pelvis and spine and head exercise. So if I chopped off my legs and chopped off my arms, I should be able to do this exercise still, which is why it's so good for spinal development and rehab of the spine and a lot of other things. So now that we've gotten the individual curve work flowing, now we're going to combine them. What we're doing is called exchanging the curves, which is essentially what the inchworm is in a nutshell. So we'll get here and we'll cross our arms, and what we'll do is we're going to start with an extended head and a flat spine. So this should be pressing in the ground, this should be extended, and we're just going to combine those two movements. So now I'm going to flatten my cervical spine and pull with my pelvis to extend my lumbar spine. So it'll look like this. Boop. And then we're going to exchange. Boop. And then we're going to exchange. Boop. And then we're going to exchange. So you can see I'm starting to move a little bit now. But what that looks like when you actually push and actually pull with your head, see, the idea is not to go anywhere when you're just doing the exchanging the curves. You're just working on pumping those movements. But the thing is if you add any sort of actual pressure to your pull and your push, what you'll notice is you start moving. So now, once you have the rhythm of exchanging those curves, now we're just going to add a little bit of pressure into our movements. We're actually going to really try to pull our body with our hips and push our body with our heads. And that combined movement is going to create the movement that we see in the inchworm. So it'll look like this. So now we're here, flat, extended, and I'm exchanging my curves, but now I'm just going to push. So you moved a couple inches already, and that's pretty much it. Once you feel comfortable with the pumping motion, just add a little bit of extra pressure, and you'll be able to start moving along. All right, so that's it, guys. Thanks for joining me and learning how to do the inchworm exercise. It's a wonderful exercise for rehabilitation and improving performance in a variety of different ways. There is one precaution to look out for when you're doing this exercise. Usually this exercise is phenomenal for most people once you're able to chunk it down and move correctly. And oftentimes even the regressed versions or the chunks that I showed you how to do can be really safe for just about anybody. The group of people that may want to proceed with this exercise with caution are those that have any sort of significant nerve root compression or disc herniations. Most disc herniations that aren't severe may be able to handle this exercise properly. However, if you're in a situation where a disc bulge or a disc herniation has gotten to the point where any sort of compression or bending or flexing or twisting causes you pain or shooting down the leg or shutting off of muscles in the leg, that is a situation where I would avoid this exercise until you are able to rehabilitate that disc or set of discs properly first. And there's a number of different exercises and ways that can be done, but I would avoid doing this exercise until that area is more stable and can handle the load of this exercise. Even people in later stages of spinal pathology development this exercise can actually be quite a good exercise for them, especially the chunked down versions progressing into the full movements. So that's one word of caution for anyone looking to do these exercises is if you have any severe spinal pathologies that if you notice this exercise causes you a lot of pain or makes your situation worse, obviously avoid it until you can rehab around it and get to it. So the next short piece of advice in terms of doing this exercise is because this exercise is pretty challenging on the nervous system, especially for beginners and people who may not be as coordinated. I wouldn't advise doing this exercise for very long periods of time, so I wouldn't try doing this for a quarter of a mile or more. Usually I limit this to a few sets of short distances, like anything up to about 10 yards or so, back and forth. So you kind of want to avoid doing this exercise for over 2 minutes, as it can be quite fatiguing to the nervous system. And you definitely don't want to do this exercise for long periods of time before you do any sort of heavy lifting. If you're going to be doing this exercise more for training purposes and less for a dynamic warm-up, so shorter periods of time, I would put this exercise later on in your workout, so that way you don't fatigue your nervous system and your spine and your coordination. You might find if you burn yourself out with this exercise too much before you go into something like a heavy deadlift or any sort of spinal loading or anything that requires a lot of coordination, it increases your likelihood of getting injured. So I would use this exercise as a warm-up, so do like maybe 1 or 2 sets of a very short distance and just get some rhythmical pumping in before you start your movements. Or if you're going to do kind of longer sets of it, I would save that until later on in your workout after you've already done your big compound movement. So that's it. Thanks again for joining me and learning how to do the inchworm exercise. Again, it's super powerful exercise, really phenomenal, and I hope this helps you learn how to go from not being able to do this exercise properly to being able to progress your way up and have the light switch turned on to where you can do this with good technique, and it will be a wonderful tool into your exercise regimen. So that's it for today. Thanks again for joining me, and I'll see you guys next time.